Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments, such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org.
In collaboration with Boise State Public Radio, the Community Library presents a new podcast, Sheep Stories. I'm host Vance Cunningham. Join me as we listen through the archives of the Trailing of the Sheep Festival to learn about the Scottish, Basque, and Peruvian immigrants foundational to the sheep herding industry over the past century. Hear their stories of traveling to Idaho and learning the language of the sheep. Find Sheep Stories wherever you get your podcasts and at boisestatepublicradio.org.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. It's Friday, which means it's time for our Reporter Roundtable when we get you up to date on the news that made headlines this last week. And the big story this week is the assassination of Charlie Kirk. This morning, officials in Utah named a suspect in the killing of the conservative activist and founder of Turning Point USA. Law enforcement say 22-year-old Tyler Robinson is the sole suspect in that shooting. During a news conference this morning, officials said Robinson's father recognized him as the person being sought by police after authorities released photos of the suspect last night. Now, Robinson was arrested late last night in St. George, Utah. He is currently being held in the Utah County Jail awaiting charges. And while the manhunt was going on, our reporter and Morning Edition host, George Prentice, sat down with Boise Mayor Lauren McLean, where the conversation turned to the shooting and to political violence and the threats that she has faced over the years as mayor. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
I have to ask up top about the events of this week that led to, we saw hundreds of people attending a vigil outside the Idaho Capitol the other night, a vigil in the shadow of the shooting of Charlie Kirk. So I have to ask if you have any words to share about the current climate, a climate that you know about quite well, a climate of political division and sometimes political violence. Your thoughts?
Yeah, George, I appreciate the question. And
now I should say here that the mayor needed a moment, an extended moment here, to collect her emotions, to collect her thoughts, before we would continue.
I'll just answer. George, I appreciate the question and appreciate the moment you just gave me to recover, because this strikes close to home. And we've talked in the past about political violence. I've written about this, the threats I've received over the years, that the experience my family has had in this, and the impact that this too-pitched culture of gun violence, of political violence, the dehumanizing that's occurring of elected officials, of people with whom we disagree. We've seen the impact of that over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, whether it be instances here that have affected me, that have been public, those that haven't, the plots against the governor of Michigan, Governor Whitmer, what happened to Nancy Pelosi's husband,
Right.
The Hoffmans in Minnesota just 2 months ago. When it happened, I learned from my kids, because it was my son that called that needed to talk through it, to yesterday, which is terrible, absolutely terrible. And in so many ways, you could see this as the tip of the spear, but I worry that it's not, that things have become so pitched that regardless of what we believe, we have a right to share those beliefs without fear for our safety, or without having taken from us members of our family or our own life. And with the assassination of Charlie Kirk on a college campus, when, yes, I disagree with him, and many people do, but he was doing what's central to what we do in this country, and that is debate. And things have become too inflamed, but that somebody would take this step and take his life and impact his family and all of those students that were there. It's incomprehensible, and I really have no words.
The only other thing I'd like to ask about is, do you fear about good people maybe thinking twice about public service?
I mean, I hear it often. Questions that folks are asking in conversations, is it really worth it?
Hmm.
How much longer um, can can we do this, or can this hold? I read something this morning that David French wrote. I really appreciate and value his thoughts on this great country and the experiment that we are, and his belief in speech and debate. And he wrote something that I found really powerful. I mean, the whole piece I found powerful. I'd encourage folks to read it. But he said assassination can cost us our country. We lose it when we stop seeing our opponents as human, when we crave vengeance more than peace, when the motivation for our political engagement stops being the common good, but rather inflicting pain and anguish on our political enemies. That's what we saw this week. Um, that's what I hear from way too many people that have dehumanized folks that are part of this American experiment, committed to debate, committed to service, guided by their values, whether you agree with them or not. And at this moment in time, we need everyone to step back, to think about how their words matter, and to demonstrate through action that what we care most about is our freedom, this country, the people that make it so great, and then to use that as a base to get beyond this really pitch time, and to look forward together to continuing this great experiment that is our country, that we'll soon be celebrating 250 years of.
Right.
That was Boise Mayor Lauren McLean speaking to Boise State Public Radio reporter and Morning Edition host George Prentice about political violence in America. Our reporters today, Emma Epperly with Idaho Education News, Nate Eaton, news director at eastidahonews.com, and Max Silverson, editor of the Star News. And Nate, I want to get right into a story that's gotten worldwide attention, but also worldwide outcry. And we should note there has been so much misinformation around this story. So, Nate, can you just start by telling us about a former BYU baseball player that was sentenced for sexually assaulting a young girl?
Yeah, this is a young man from Blackfoot, Idaho. His name is Camden Dahl, and he admitted to sexually abusing a young girl between the time she was 7 and 12 years old. The girl is now 15. So this happened over the course of 5 years, and he was charged in two different counties in East Idaho last year. And there, as the legal system normally takes, it's taken some time before a resolution was finally reached. And there was a plea agreement. He was originally charged with felony lewd conduct with a child, and both sides, his side and the prosecution in Fremont County, they went to mediation. And they ultimately, at the end of the day, agreed to a plea agreement where those charges, the lewd conduct with a child, would be adjusted to felony injury to a child, and he would not have to register as a sex offender. And there was a binding plea agreement, meaning the judge really couldn't do much. He could have thrown it out and rejected the whole thing, and that would have put them at square one. And so that's where we're kind of up to date now, where he was sentenced about a week ago, week and a half ago, and the victim took the stand and said, begged the judge to not accept the plea agreement. And
Mm.
so did her family members, and so did several other people, saying, "Please, we want him to be registered as a sex offender." The judge ultimately said, "If I reject the plea agreement, you will have to start all the way over, and this will have to go to trial." So he did accept the plea agreement, And Candon was sentenced 5 to 10 years in prison, but the sentence was suspended. So he will serve 180 days in jail and have 200 hours of community service.
So, Nate, when this story was published, to say that it took off like wildfire, I think is an understatement. In fact, the first time I even heard about this was actually on TikTok, and
Yeah.
it was from a creator that wasn't even from Idaho, let alone on the West Coast. So, can you talk to us about this part of it? Because there was so much misinformation just being spread literally around the world.
It I haven't seen anything like it. I know I've talked to several attorneys who have not seen anything like it. It's mainly been TikTokers, social media influencers that took our video on East Idaho News. This whole sentencing hearing was about an hour. They took snippets, tiny little snippets, and put it together and created videos that were not 100% accurate. They called this man a rapist. I'm not defending him by any mean. I want to be clear,
Mhm.
but in the eyes of the law, it was not a rape, and he was not a rapist. And they started to put his family members' phone numbers and addresses out there. People that wrote letters of support on his behalf before they knew all the facts to the judge. They started to release this information, and it just spread like crazy. And they demanded that the judge be contacted, and that the prosecution and the defense attorney, all while not reporting 100% the facts and also the context of it. As I said, the legal system can be complicated. Plea agreements can be complicated. And there was a lot of moving parts here, which even the judge admitted in the sentencing. He said nobody wins here, nobody wins here. But because it took off so much online, everything went viral. It kind of took on a life of its own.
And in fact, such a life of its own, Nate, that my understanding is the judge in this case actually started receiving death threats to the point that the Idaho Supreme Court, which they don't normally do this, released a news release, I believe, Sunday night, correct?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you never, unless it's a big story, you're not going to hear from them on a weekend. But this past
Right.
Sunday night, the Supreme Court sent out a news release calling for people to tone down the vitriol. This Judge Boyce in Rexburg, his life was threatened. His family members, in fact, someone on one of these TikTokers reported seeing his son or him, I believe it was him, at the state fair and said, "Go get him," something to those effect. I know that the courthouses were just slammed with calls for multiple days, calls saying, "Watch out for a bullet in the chest." We did a
Mm.
follow-up story based on this news release, saying, talking about the backlash that the courts have received, and then we started to get some of that, saying that we are defending a child rapist as East Idaho News by simply reporting that there's misinformation out there. In fact, Judge Boyce, there was a judicial conference this past week where all the judges get together. He did not go because of security
Hmm.
concerns. And so security has been increased at the courthouses, at least here in Eastern Idaho. And it is something that is kind of a new thing, a new phenomenon with the advent of social media and with true crime influencers on TikTok and other platforms gaining a big following. People reach out and react. And maybe after this, there'll be even more, the fact that we're talking about it. But
Oh, well, and Nate, I do appreciate the reporting that you did in really walking people through the legal aspect of this. Because with the advent of social media, I think it's very fair to say, especially these online kind of true crime sleuths, um, many of them are not lawyers. They truly don't fully understand the legal system. I am absolutely not condoning what this individual did, but I think it's important that people understand how the legal system worked in this case and why the outcome was the outcome it was. So, kind of take us through that again, because even in your reporting, I mean, you have links to the Idaho statute, that talk about lewd conduct with a child, that talk about how rape is defined. I mean, you even put the statute in about the fact that threatening a judge it's a crime.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I would say, I don't know a stat. I would say maybe 90% of cases don't go to trial, maybe higher.
Mhm.
Overall, in Idaho and in probably most cases, if everything went to trial, you would have an overloaded court system. And this is one of those where they try to work things out before a trial happens, as long as all parties agree to things. And you also can re-traumatize a victim by having them take the stand in a trial and having those details revealed. And so this, like other cases, went to what's called mediation, where another judge, not associated with this case at all, another judge goes and you basically put the defendant in one room with his attorney, and you put the victim and the state in other rooms, and they say, what are you willing to give? What are you willing to get? And it's kind of a back and forth discussion, bargaining, you could say. And then once all sides agree, the judge says, okay, we've reached an agreement. Now, all sides might not agree, and that's when it proceeds to trial. The victim said, and her family, that they were exhausted. They at the end of the mediation, they just wanted to get it done, and so they reluctantly agreed to the plea agreement, which is that the charge would be dropped. And I think the bigger issue was that he would not have to register as a sex offender. That
Mhm.
seemed to be the big hot button issue in all of this. And so that happened months ago, and then the sentencing date was set. And so by the time sentencing rolled around, the family was still unpleased with it. Uh, and the judge could have said, okay, you know what, then that's it. And then this would have dragged on for another year, unfortunately, maybe less. And so he said, I hate to put you through this. So again, nobody really won here, but there's so much more aspects to it than a quote child rapist gets away with it, as was portrayed
Mhm.
on many platforms online.
And I think, Nate, it's fair to say that in the culture and climate that we are living in right now, in particular with the events of this week, um, political violence is absolutely not the answer. You can disagree vehemently with this judge's decision. You can absolutely not agree with it, wish that he had made a different decision. You can support that family, but death threats against anyone, even this judge. It is, as we said, it's a crime, but we have got to tap down this vitriol that's going on.
Yeah, and you think about the clerks that are taking the calls and hearing these horrible messages from people. Most of them they don't believe are even from Idaho. They're from outside the state. And
Hmm.
so they have to worry about their security, their concern. There is a way, as you mentioned, if you disagree with a sentence, and many people disagree with court sentences all the time, but to call and harass and threaten and get to the point where you're calling out family members and you're posting addresses and phone numbers of people close to the case online on Facebook. I mean, we on our story, our comment moderator was working nonstop, deleting posts, doxing people, doxing the
Mm.
children of the defense attorney who's just doing his job defending them. Uh, and again, we're not defending this guy's actions at all. This is the way that it played
No,
out
not at
in
all.
court. The judge acknowledged no one's a winner here. I think all sides would say that. You're right. Nobody really won here. And I think this story maybe took off because he was an athlete, well known. We had the video from the courthouse, from the sentencing. It is
Hmm.
hard to listen to as his victim cries and begs the judge not to take the agreement. Um, so yeah, I mean there's all aspects that there are many things to be upset about, but to take it to a whole new level just isn't very effective.
Yeah, I appreciate your reporting on this, Nate. Emma, switching gears completely, I want to talk about something going on in the Coeur d'Alene School District. And I have to say, having recently in the last year and a half had a child learn to drive and having had to shell out upwards of $600 for driver's education classes, I'm personally interested in what's going on in regards to driver's education programming being cut from the school district in Coeur d'Alene. So can you first tell us about the program that's actually been in place, what, for decades in this school district?
Yeah, so Coeur d'Alene, like many school districts across the state of Idaho, offers a driver's education program at the school. And this program in Coeur d'Alene specifically is supposed to run cost neutral, which basically means that the money that parents and families pay for their child to learn to drive, those fees cover the cost of the program. So there's no state money, there's not levy funds being used to cover the program. But recently, this program has kind of been running in a deficit, and the longtime instructor is retiring. And so it was a time for the Coeur d'Alene School District to just reevaluate, what are we doing with this program? They're going to have to purchase a new car. Driver's ed cars are expensive because they have to have that safety brake put in on the passenger side. So you can't really resell them, and there's insurance. There's all these factors in running a program like this. But what is unique about this program is that there is in-person classroom instruction. Most private programs across the state utilize an online course for that classroom instruction and then provide in-person, in-car training, if that makes sense.
Okay. So, Emma, why was the program cut?
Yeah, so Coeur d'Alene trustees were really not happy with the situation they found themselves in. They initially discussed this last month in August, and then asked for some more work from school district employees, and then decided to cut the program earlier this week. And the reason is that House Bill 531 was passed in 2024, and it allowed students in rural areas and in school districts that did not offer a driver's ed course at the school district to have their parent or guardian supervise it's 90 plus hours of on the road training, and then take an online course or an approved course for that classroom work. But only students either in a rural area or if their school district did not offer a program could exercise that parent program. And that parent program is just a lot less expensive than both the school district program and a private program. It costs about $75. So trustees in Coeur d'Alene felt like it's not fair to take away access to that parent program, which is way more cost effective, by continuing to offer their school district driver's ed program. But they were also frustrated because they heard from a lot of families that the in-person class was a huge benefit to them. A parent with an autistic child emailed and said, this in-person instruction is invaluable to us. And then other families and trustees expressed, a parent option, it might be cheaper, but not all parents feel confident in their ability to teach their child to drive or have the time to do those driving lessons, to have that supervision. So they really wanted all options to be available to families in their community. So they were frustrated with the state law. And so I reached out to Representative Ron Mendive, who had sponsored the bill back in 2024, and he immediately understood their frustration and said, if he had his way, that parents would just be allowed to teach their children regardless of where they live or whether their district offers a driver's ed course. But laws are born out of compromise. And so that was initially what he wanted to happen. And they had passed a bill allowing that a few years ago, but it was vetoed by the governor, who, was calling out some discrepancies in the requirements for parent education versus a licensed program. So that's why he says he vetoed it. Representative Mendive said he plans to introduce a bill during this upcoming legislative session that would allow parents to teach their children to drive, regardless of where they live or if their district offers a driver's ed course. And Coeur d'Alene trustees said, if the law changes, they plan to relaunch the program, and they've secured a donated car from Parker Toyota up in Coeur d'Alene. So everybody was kind of on the same page, that they would like more options for kids.
I think it's so interesting because it is pricey to
Yeah.
pay for driver's ed outside of the school. But what I find fascinating about this, Emma, is that no one's brought up the fact that in Idaho you can get your license at 15. So as a parent, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, and we didn't let our son get his license at 15. He had to wait till 16. But it's this idea of we're going to have very young drivers on the road. I was not confident to teach my child how to drive. I mean, you know how teenagers talk back to you. That's the last thing you need, is to try to teach them how to drive. With all of that said, though, will these but you still have the option, but you would have to pay for it for these
Mhm.
in-person driver's ed classes. It's just giving parents the option of teaching them themselves.
Right. And I think it's really important to emphasize there's this on the road training, right? Which is what we're
Yeah.
talking
Oh,
about
yeah.
here. So like you in your car with your kid, probably some yelling. And the
Never.
programs you pay for, yeah, never any yelling. But you in person, um, teaching your kid how to drive. And then there's the classes you pay for where there is an instructor in the car with them.
Hmm.
But the big difference here is that both for a private course and for you teaching your child, um, they still have to complete an online course. A lot of these private companies use Idaho State online course. The difference in Coeur
Hmm.
d'Alene for that classroom instruction, teaching the rules of the road. In the Coeur d'Alene program, they have a teacher in the classroom teaching you those rules. So that's what set the Coeur d'Alene program apart. It's a little less expensive than some of the private programs, but still pretty costly. It's about I think they'd have to raise it to about $400. So it's still really expensive, just in general. But what we're really talking about is the on the road training would be supervised by a parent. So yeah, that's
Hmm.
just a little bit of nuance there, but yeah, it's an interesting topic for sure.
No, it absolutely is. Thanks for that update. Max, let me
Yeah.
bring you to the conversation because for years it has been really difficult for the Donnelly Fire Department to fill positions. Can you give us just a brief history as to why that's been the case?
Hi, Gemma. Yes, sure thing. It's an interesting situation. Donnelly Fire has been underfunded kind of for years, and as have our two other EMS agencies in Valley County. That includes McCall Fire and Cascade Fire. And stick with me for this explanation because it's a bit of steeped in bureaucracy. Like the reason
Okay.
is because of the way that emergency medical services were funded in Valley County. Each of these agencies is their own district. It's not part of the city government. And for years, EMS was overseen by the county at a levy rate that generated 1.2 million per year. And they contracted each fire district for EMS services. And that funding was split between the three agencies. So that revenue just didn't cover the cost of fully staffing an ambulance 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So each district supplemented that through the levy, their own district levy, which is supposed to be covering the fire side of that agency. So they just didn't really have enough money. Long story short.
Okay. So, Max, that's not the case anymore because Donnelly Fire had almost 100 applicants for 5 open positions. So, what has changed?
Yeah, it was kind of a crazy thing that happened. So the reason for that is no, in November, voters passed a countywide levy override that funded EMS at 4.2 million per year. So that means each agency is now getting about 1.2 million, the amount that was previously split between the three of them. It was the third time this was on the ballot, and voters narrowly rejected it 2 times. The override gives them enough money to fund their ambulance services finally. So Donnelly, in particular, advertised for 5 firefighters/EMT positions. They'll do both at not at the $50,000 wage it used to be, but now it's kind of 70 to 90,000 a year, and
Hmm.
that led to an almost comical situation where 92 people are competing for these 5 spots. Those are applicants from
Wow.
across Idaho, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, Utah. They're going to whittle them down to the final candidates. And I think the district is really pretty thrilled to have this type of response. Over the years, they've tried to get firefighter EMTs, firefighters/paramedics, and had almost no applicants. It's been difficult for them to fully staff
Yeah.
the service.
Nate, you spent a good portion of your summer undercover with the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. Can you remind us what this task force is and what they do?
This is a task force run in the state of Idaho by the Attorney General's office. There's 61 of these task forces, I guess I should say, across the country. In every state, some states have more than one. And their job, their responsibility is to go after child predators, in a simple way of saying it, predators who solicit children online for sex or who engage in child pornography or child sex abuse material called CSAM. And this could be people that produce it or distribute it or have it on their laptops, their computers, their phones, whatever. And so their job in these units is to track these people and bring them, criminally charge them.
And Nate, this task force, my understanding is they get overwhelmed with reports. Can you talk to us about, I believe it has to do with the federal law, correct, that requires this kind of reporting?
Yeah, so there is a federal law that if an internet provider has a user that is looking up this type of material or engaging in it, they have to report to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So the National Center, NCMEC is commonly called, gets thousands and thousands and thousands of reports every day from all over the world, all over the country. NCMEC then passes those tips onto the local ICAC units across the states. So in Idaho, so far, we get about 100 a week that goes to the Attorney
Mm.
General's office. And there are two ladies we met who handle all these tips. They're mothers. They work in the AG's office, and the tip comes up on their computer. And their job is to determine whether there is enough merit there to have a case be legally prosecuted. So, an example, if it's two teenagers sexting with each other, they're probably not going to pursue it legally because that takes a lot of time and resources, but they will reach out to the teenager's parents and say, hey, just so you know, this is
Mm.
happening. If there's a question on whether the children in the material are adults, if it looks like a 17-year-old or it could be 18, any question on prosecutorial issues, they might not advance it. So out of those 100 a week, they generally forward about 50 onto the investigators who then
Oh,
take it
wow.
from there. Yeah, so about half of them proceed to an actual formal investigation.
And Nate, you spent 4 months undercover with these officers, and I'm curious about what you learned. Maybe can you begin with learning about the tracking tools that they use?
They have a lot of interesting tools. They have one room that is just full of these high-tech computers. Think of the, highest tech computers you can. They say in order to think a lot of these men, and I will say they're all men. They have arrested maybe one woman in the decades they've been doing this. So it's all men. And they're smart. They know how to work computers. They know how to hide computer files. They know how to, use the dark web. So in this room are
Hmm.
these high-tech computers where they have to outthink the perpetrators, and they have boxes where they can stick in a cell phone that will immediately stop transmission, but not check anything else on the phones, so that you're not altering anything. One of the coolest tools I will say is the canine badgers, the canine dogs. One's name's Badger, and these are dogs that I did not know this. There's a chemical that is sprayed on anything that has a memory, electronic device that has a memory card, and that's to help it from overheating. And these dogs can sniff out that chemical. And so if
Oh,
you have a hard drive that's loaded with this material and you hide it in your attic or you hide it in a mattress or something that the human might not be able to see, they send in these canine dogs and they sniff out these devices. And I saw it up close in person. We saw these dogs in action, and they really do work.
so this is part of it. Some of this you were on a sting operation as well, because this is where it gets to, correct? When after tracked someone down and all of that. So Nate, what was that like to see this in person?
Yeah, so once they advance these cases and there's enough probable cause to get a warrant, then they determine how they're going to take the suspects into custody and actually seize their devices and search. And normally these are done in the morning before the perpetrators go to work. They will usually try to stop them on their way to work or wherever they have to leave. It's because it's a less volatile situation where they pull them over and they say, there's been some questionable material on your devices. You need to come with us. While they go and interview the person, other deputies and officers go into the home. They have a warrant,
Mm.
and they look for devices. They look for hard drives. They look for phones. They look for Game Boys, anything that could contain this material. And then they actually have a big van that they can analyze these devices right there on site. They can plug them in, they can see if the material's on there, and if there is, then they might arrest the person or officially charge them right then and there, and then it works its way through the court system. And one of the interesting things I learned in all of this, Gemma, is that Idaho is one of the few states at the moment that treats AI generated CSAM or child pornography the same as if a real child were
Oh.
in the material. So if there's AI stuff on there involving a child, you will get the exact same charges as if there was a real legitimate child in there. And that helps prosecutors, and that helps with the question of, is it real, is it fake? In the eyes of the law, it really doesn't matter.
Mm. Okay, good to know. Thanks on that was some really in-depth reporting. And folks, if you want to learn more, go to eastidahonews.com and you can see all of that reporting. So, Max, the McCall Winter Carnival will be coming up before we know it, but the parade might be in jeopardy. What's going on?
Yes, switching gears here. The annual McCall Winter Carnival, which is run by the McCall Chamber or McCall Area Chamber of Commerce, sorry. It's
Hmm.
coming up January 30th to February 8th. And the carnival costs about $100,000 to put on, like
Oh,
logistics, security, traffic control, bathroom. It's very expensive. And about half of that is for the parade itself in direct and sort of indirect costs to make that happen. It's just gotten more expensive over the years, and the chamber loses about $20,000 on the parade itself. And losing money at that rate is just something that they say they cannot sustain.
okay. So, what are they asking for the public to do, Max? Because I mean, this is a big part of the festival.
It is, yeah. It's one of the bigger front-facing things about the festival. That and the ice sculptures, of course.
Hmm.
But they've done something kind of unorthodox, asking for donations from the public and seeking corporate sponsorships to keep it going. I mean, the corporate sponsorships have always been a part of it, of course, but this year they launched the Charlie's Fan Club in reference to the mythical lake monster of Payette Lake. And they're seeking donations of $10 or above to fund the parade.
And have they gotten donations coming in?
We did. Or they did. I talked to their organizers today. So far, they've got about $500 in donations, ranging from 10 to $100. So people are
Okay, well,
interested, I guess.
and they've got some time. All right, Emma, I've only got a little under 2 minutes, but I want to talk about this story real quick because a senior in high school up at Coeur d'Alene had quite the summer. Tell us about his Senate Page program.
Yeah, so this is a fun one. Coeur d'Alene High School senior Caleb Torgensen um, was looking for something to do over the summer, something a little more exciting than just a typical summer job to kind of inform what he's going to do in college. And so he was thinking about political science, did some research, and found the U.S. Senate Page program. And so he looked up Idaho senators, and neither of them had anything on their websites about sponsoring pages. So a page in the U.S. Senate is someone who basically helps the chamber run. So they help set up speeches,
Hmm.
they run and get documents for senators, and just kind of really help with whatever is needed on the Senate floor and with each party. And so to become a page, you have to be sponsored by a sitting senator. And those sponsorships are basically allotted based on seniority, and there's only 30 pages per session. So it can be hard to get a spot, especially when there's 100 senators and they're all kind of wanting to sponsor someone. And so Caleb Torgensen was able to get a spot through Senator Crapo, and he spent his summer in DC and really just learning about everything U.S. government.
What a great experience for him. Well, I want to thank all of
Yeah.
you so much for your time today. Really appreciate all of you. A big thanks to our Reporter Roundtable, Emma Epperly with Idaho Education News, Nate Eaton, News Director at eastidahonews.com, and Max Silverson, editor of the Star News. They have a lot more stories that they have been covering. So please, folks, make sure that you take a look at all of their work. And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Thanks so much for listening. And just a reminder, you can find all of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.